Our friend Julie Kelly's with us. We've given her the Mark Levin Journalism Award. The Pulitzer Prize, of course, has been badly stained by the Washington Compost and the New York Slimes. Julie, you've written another blockbuster, and you've got your Declassified with Julie Kelly on Substack column. What did you find here? And it's very important.
It is, Mark. It's just another example of the weaponization, exploitation of the law to punish January 6th defendants. We already know that they have weaponized a law like obstruction of an official proceeding, which was the post-Enron tampering with witnesses and evidence. Now slap that against more than 300 J6ers, a felony charge punishable by up to 20 years in prison. By the way, one of the counts Jack Smith has against Donald Trump. But what we have here is another example of excessive sentences. So what the appellate court in D.C. just did was vacate the sentence, what they called a split sentence, for one of the defendants who pleaded guilty to parading. Now, Mark, this is a Class B misdemeanor petty offense that the Chief Judge Beryl Howell admitted in 2021 that federal courts don't even deal with. Yet this is the most common charge against January 6ers. They're dragged into federal court in Washington, D.C., and most of them have pleaded guilty to this. Well, then what the judges decided to do was impose not just jail time for this petty offense, but added probation on top of it. In many cases, 2 to 3 years, so it would run through the 2024 election. Well, that's a no-no. As you know, Mark, as an attorney, you either incarcerate, especially for a misdemeanor, you can choose jail time, or you choose probation. And then if you choose jail time, you could use supervised release. Well, what these judges in Washington, D.C. did, including Beryl Howell, including Judge Tanya Chutkin, the judge handling the Trump case, is violate sentencing guidance and impose jail time and probation. This will affect at least 60 cases. People who have already served their jail time, by the way. But hopefully now we'll go back to the appellate court, have their sentences vacated as well, or the judges just turn around and change their sentencing agreement to begin with.
Your point to the public is you don't get to do both. It's one or the other. So you don't sentence somebody to prison and then say, by the way, on top of that, you've got blah, blah, probation. But the judges did that in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us, in addition to the two judges you mentioned, two Obama appointees, what other judges have done that off the top of your head? Royce Lamberth,
I don't have
right?
the judges. Yes, he did.
Your article mentions Royce Lamberth. I'll tell you why this bothers me. I've known Royce Lamberth for decades. He came out of the Reagan Justice Department. I believe he was head of the Civil Division, but he'd been an assistant U.S. attorney and so forth. And prior to January 6th, he was a tough judge, but he was a very fair judge. You've been tracking this closer than anybody. I don't find him to be a fair judge at all anymore, do you?
No, he's actually one of the worst judges, unfortunately. In fact, there's a man from Florida right now who's on the lam, who has evaded. He left his home in Naples, Florida last Monday. He was convicted by Judge Lamberth in a bench trial where reportedly Judge Lamberth, 81 years old, was falling asleep, needed help up to his chair from his clerks, and after a bench trial convicted this man of several offenses, including obstruction of an official proceeding. DOJ came back and asked for 14 years in prison for this man. Jeez. He never even went inside the building. But Judge Lamberth convicted him of assault on police with a deadly or dangerous weapon, accusing him, DOJ, of spraying pepper spray at police. Now, that's a common occurrence in Washington, D.C. I mean, you have carjackers who get off the hook for that. But here he convicted him of this crime and other crimes. DOJ wanted 14 years in prison, and this man left his house last Monday, left a note basically, saying I'm not going to go out this way, and they still haven't found him a week later. Judge Lamberth is one of the toughest convictors and sentencers by far, also keeping people under pretrial detention, nonviolent offenders.
Is this the same Department of Justice that came to the defense of the two Ivy League lawyers who threw a Molotov cocktail into a police car thinking that the cops might be in there, and they were arrested, and then the Department of Justice asked the federal judiciary up there, the federal court, to let them free, that they'd served enough, that they didn't have a bad background. So they didn't even finish their sentence of, I think, maybe a year or two or whatever it was. There's not really equal justice, is there? That's just a bunch of crap, isn't it?
There isn't, and I'm telling you, these sentences, and I'm very happy to see the D.C. Circuit vacate this man's sentence and really condemn not just Judge Lambert, but all the judges, and particularly the government, for misrepresenting in their sentencing recommendations that they could allow for this split sentence. And the judges on the circuit court said, no, this is not true. You intentionally misread it. They actually went through this funny sentence diagramming to explain to the government and to the judges how this was not allowed. Now, Mark, there were judges on the D.C. District Court, Judge Dabney Friedrich, for example. A few of them did bring up the fact that they were not allowed to impose jail time and probation. So they rejected the government's recommendation when they came forward with those sentencing memorandum. But then you had other judges, of course, Beryl Howell, who is the one who forced DOJ to start doing that. She then sentenced at least 9 defendants to jail time and probation. This is the chief judge of the D.C. District Court, knowing that she was violating federal sentencing guidance so they could inflict more punishment on January 6th misdemeanors and also surveil them through the 2024 election, which is what Judge Lambert and Judge Hogan, another Reagan appointee, admitted in open court that, yes, we need the government to keep an eye on you through the 2024 election.
Judge Thomas Hogan is another disaster. And he said what you're saying. He said to cover the next election to make sure that you do not fall victim to false gods again. Who the hell do these judges think they are, speaking like this to other people?
I mean, I hear it all the time.
We're here with Julie Kelly. Judge Justin Walker, writing for the majority on the circuit court, as you write, smacked down the Department of Justice and Judge Lambert in no uncertain terms. Here's what he writes. Probation and imprisonment are alternative sentences. They cannot generally be combined. So the district court could not impose both for Little's petty offense. A misdemeanor, they throw him in prison for, I guess, 60 days or so, and then put this probation on top of it. And, you know, Julie Kelly, these district court judges had to know exactly what they were doing, didn't they?
Well, yes, because what happened is, I explained in my piece on my Substack, is the government was sort of the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, which throughout 2021 was under the leadership of an acting AG until Matthew Graves, the man who's there now, took over. DOJ recognized that they couldn't do this, which is why they did it. Until Beryl Howell had her tirade in October of 2021, right before Matthew Graves took over, the DOJ was only recommending either home detention, home incarceration, maybe a year or two of probation. After she grilled this prosecutor as to why the government was not bringing the split sentence, then all of a sudden, lo and behold, Matthew Graves takes over, the Biden appointee, and in December is the first recommendation for 4 months in jail and 3 years probation on this petty offense. And that sort of became the customary sentencing recommendation that a lot of the judges went along with. As I said, some of them didn't, but she was happy to sign off on that at least 9 more times after she, of course, got her way, because it's what Beryl Howell does.
I want to remind people she was an aide to Patrick Leahy for 10 years before being appointed by Obama to the court. She was the chief judge of the district court system there. She also ruled and seized Donald Trump's attorney-client privilege and did it in a secret proceeding with a secret order. She also ruled that Donald Trump was a flight risk, so she did not allow him to be informed that there was a search warrant put out for his Twitter information. And you also have the current judge, what is her name, Chutnik, or whatever the hell her name is?
Tanya Chutkin, she's handling
Chutkin's, she ruled that Donald Trump's executive privilege doesn't apply. So all the privileges and all the due process rights and so forth that apply generally, if you're a mass murderer or whatever, were not applied to Donald Trump and are not applied to most of these people. Most of these people did nothing violent, correct?
No, the man who I discussed in Judge Howell's tirade was inside the Capitol for 10 minutes. I mean, I believe the same is with James Little, who was the appellant in this court ruling. I believe he was inside for 10 minutes. None of them were charged with violent crimes. Most of these people have no criminal record, none whatsoever. They didn't even realize they were breaking the law because, of course, they were going into open doors and some Capitol police officers were standing right there. So they didn't realize that they were committing this petty offense that would ultimately destroy their lives, bankrupt them, brand them as a domestic terrorist, which is what the DOJ has done, and then be the subject of excessive, unlawful sentences from these D.C. judges. You know, Mark, I call Beryl Howell the tumor of the malignancy of Washington, D.C. Everything that has gone wrong in that city, the weaponization of the DOJ, cannot happen without her imprimatur, her 7-year reign of terror as the chief judge, handling the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation, and now both the January 6th and classified documents case that was investigated in Washington, D.C., switched to Florida at the last minute, precisely so DOJ and Jack Smith could get the rubber stamp that they got from Beryl Howell, that they have gotten for years. And so this is why I call her the tumor. She is the tumor of the malignancy of Washington, D.C. I wish House Republicans would start impeachment proceedings against her. Because
well, she's on what, senior status now?
No, just her. No, she's a regular judge, I believe. Her term, there's only a 7-year term as chief judge. I'm sure she was very reluctant to give up that power to James Fosberg, another Obama appointee who's not doing much better job. But nonetheless, she's wreaked a lot of havoc in this country, piercing attorney-client privilege between the president and his attorney, and calling him a flight risk in a non-disclosure order.
What do you make of the 30-year sentence they seek for, what is it, the head of the Proud Boys or something?
Yes. Yes.
Tell us about that. 30 years? I mean, I have to be honest, I watched this show, The First 48. I'm hooked on that show. And you see guys, drug deals, they kill 2 or 3 people, maybe they'll get life and sent, it depends, or they kill somebody, they'll get 20 years with probation or 30 years. Talk about 30 years? What did this guy do? Do you know? Are you familiar with this?
Yes, I covered the Proud Boys case extensively. I went to the trial. I covered a lot of the motions.
But this guy for 30 years, what did he do?
He wasn't even Washington, D.C. at the time, Mark. This is Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, who was not even in D.C. on January 6th, convicted by a D.C. jury of seditious conspiracy along with 3 other co-defendants who also committed no violent crime. They brought no weapons to the Capitol. They didn't assault police officers. Convicted in no time of seditious conspiracy. And now Matthew Graves, the D.C. U.S. Attorney and DOJ, asking for 33 to life for Enrique Tarrio, Ethan Nordine, Joseph Biggs, who is also one of the men convicted of seditious conspiracy. More, mostly First Amendment case, movement of these individuals, making plans to go to Washington, D.C. There were at least a dozen FBI informants run into that group who were stoking. I just have new video posted on my Substack from last week, an FBI informant who committed multiple crimes as he was embedded in the Proud Boys. He has not been charged. But this is all optics because the government tied Donald Trump to the Proud Boys. And they want these sentences to make headlines. They want to punish these men for being loyal to Donald Trump, and they want to send a signal, which I still believe Jack Smith is going to bring seditious conspiracy charges against Trump, that this will be the consequence. They did the same to Stuart Rhodes. They asked for 22 years in prison, and they're asking for even more for the Proud Boys.
And Rhodes got what, 17, 18 years?
I believe the Judge Maida, imposed a 19-year sentence. And get 19. This, Mark, the DOJ is appealing Judge Maida's sentencing, appealing his sentencing because they want the full sentencing recommendation of 22 years for Stuart Rhodes.
Sometimes I just don't know what to say. I mean, when you have a corrupt judiciary, there's no way out. There's no way out. That's why Stalin and all the rest of them, and Putin, they control the judiciary, they control the outcome, they control it all. And you take your political opponents and you crush them. And look, I remember when the Supreme Court ruled about Skokie, Illinois, and there's the Nazis who pick a predominantly Jewish community, and they march down the street, and they are defended by the ACLU, and they're defended by the civil liberties groups and so forth and so on. It just amazes me. And the same Democrats who broke their asses to get freedom for the Puerto Rican independence groups that committed acts of terrorism against the Capitol building and the Weather Underground and Obama's buddy who was involved in that organization and that group. They bombed the Capitol. They hit the Pentagon. They were trying to hit other places and so forth. And even Julie, you have the effort by these BLM and Antifa, thugs trying to break through the fence of the White House, injuring God knows how many uniformed Secret Service have to rush the president down to the bunker, the nuclear bunker. You don't even hear about that as an insurrection where they're trying to decapitate 1/3 of the government. I don't ever hear of it. Do you?
No, all of those charges have not only been dropped, but Matthew Graves, the same D.C. U.S. attorney who is still rounding up J6ers every single week, negotiated a civil settlement between BLM rioters who were suing Park Police and Secret Service for using excessive force against them. Matthew Graves basically blamed police for those riots, told them to shape up and learn better ways to manage mobs and crowds. And this is the same guy who wants 14 years in prison for someone who allegedly sprayed pepper gel at police officers on January 6th. There is no fair application of justice in the nation's capital. And that should alarm, to your point, Mark, everyone, regardless of your political views, that this is happening in our nation's capital that has such contempt and vengefulness, revenge and retaliating against people simply because they protested Joe Biden's election that day. And the judges,
you talk about impeaching. Hell, I have a better idea, actually. I think, my humble opinion. I have no problem with that. And I'm going to say this out loud so they're listening to me. The Republican leadership, particularly in the House, the entire judiciary under the Supreme Court is created by Congress. They pass these judiciary acts. They need to break up this cabal of judges in Washington, D.C. They need to move jurisdiction for many of these so-called offenses, or certainly these areas of public life, to other parts of the country so you cannot concentrate all this in one place where the ruling class literally rules from the judiciary. And the courthouse of which you speak is right across the street from the Department of Justice and right near the FBI. This has to be broken up so that you don't just have Democrats and pathetic Republicans, but mostly Democrats with pathetic Republicans, making rules like this for the entire federal government and treating people like this. Do you agree?
Absolutely. They should dismantle the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, the D.C. Federal Court, and the Washington FBI Field Office. They are rogue agencies who work dependently with each other on nothing but political cases that have nothing to do with Democrats, of course. You have Matthew Graves, remember, the D.C. U.S. attorney, who told David Weiss, no, I'm not going to pursue tax charges against Hunter Biden. This is the same Matthew Graves who did that. The same Matthew Graves has a 67% declination rate for violent criminals in Washington, D.C. He handles both local and federal cases in the nation's capital. He's the only one who does that. He's ignoring what's happening in Washington, D.C., descending into violent chaos every day. So he can continue to round up, paraders or people who he says committed obstruction of an official proceeding, working hand in hand with Washington FBI Field Office and this D.C. District Court led by Beryl Howell and now another Obama appointee, James Vosberg.
And they're lucky to get that decision out of the circuit because, as you know, Obama and Reid, when he ran the Senate, they added seats to that circuit, and it's now a fairly liberal circuit, whereas before it was pretty solid. So they must have gotten pretty good judges on that panel, no?
Well, Justin Walker, I believe, is a Trump appointee, and the other judge, his name escapes me, but the dissent was I believe, either Clinton or Obama judge.
Figures.
Who tried to figure out how this was legal, right?
All right, Julie, thanks for everything. We'll keep monitoring what you're doing, and God bless you, my friend.
You too, Mark. Thanks so much for covering my work.
Well, it's a pleasure. Trust me.